The agenda this week put politics and therapy on the couch, assessed Sweden's pandemic track record, and heard arguments for bringing phonics back into Ontario's elementary reading curriculum. The agenda's week in review begins with federal Conservative Party leadership hopeful Jean Charest.
The idea is that carbon pricing cannot discriminate against rural Canadians. It cannot be a wealth transfer tax from one part of the country to the other. It has to be simple, it has to be flexible and smart in the way that it is implemented so that we transition while using oil and gas. You know, Europe put out their policy on transition where they very clearly say we are going to use nuclear and natural gas. Now, if they do it, so can we. And what we should do is a comprehensive policy that supports carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, green, blue, biofuels, and small modular reactors. That's the comprehensive approach we need to take.
Do you worry that you're offside from the majority of people in your home province of Quebec who tend to be anti-pipeline and who are not big supporters of oil and gas?
I've been criticized since the beginning of this race. I did an interview in French radio a few weeks ago where the interviewer, a very popular show, said he was disappointed that I was favorable to pipelines, disappointed that I am favorable to the oil and gas industry. But you know what? If we are going to get things done, we need a leader in the party who's able to stand up in Quebec and say, these are the things I believe in. The problem part of the problem, Steve, is that we haven't had someone in Quebec who's spoken to these issues, who's championed these issues and said, here's why we should do it. Now, the war in Ukraine has brought forward two very real issues. One is security of supply, which no one thinks about unless there's a crisis, but that's a job for governments. But that, all of a sudden, Canadians realize, well, here we have something we should attend to and make sure we have security of supply. The other issue is that we could have very well be an alternative to supplying oil and gas to Europe had we had our act together and done pipeline projects. And now the cruel situation we're in is that Europeans are indirectly funding Russia to attack Ukraine. And so all of a sudden, there's a different view on these issues that we need to speak to if we're going to make better choices.
If you were the Prime Minister today, how would Canadian policy vis-a-vis this war in Ukraine be different?
Well, I would be very, very committed to giving lethal weapons to Ukraine. I think we have to do as much as we can. As much as I dislike the idea of lethal weapons, because it's just the reality of war, that we need to support Ukrainians in fighting back against Russia. But we're not very well equipped to do that because we have not really had a strong defense policy in the last few years. It's been very weak. The other thing is support by any other way through financing. And the third thing is refugees and being very, very much a helping hand for those Ukrainians who need to be supported as they find refuge and security. Some of them may choose to come here, and we have to be respectful of the fact they may choose to come here for a short period of time, a medium. We need to understand their particular circumstances. Some of them may choose to stay on forever, and that would be an extraordinary gain for the country. But those are three areas in which Canada needs to play a role.
Good therapy is about finding the balance between comfort and a good alliance and challenge. It's a strong therapeutic alliance that allows for the necessary challenges that I have to do with my clients in order for therapy to be effective. So that's kind of on one side of it. On another side of it, and again, getting back to the specific example that I'm thinking of, I had a first session with a client who, I won't give any details, but I will say that the client was displaying an article of clothing that had a particular symbol on it that has been associated with certain political views that I personally find reprehensible. But as a therapist, my job is not to immediately attack that person and criticize them and question, how dare you wear this symbol in my office? My job is to approach that person with curiosity about what that symbol means to them, what their understanding is of it, how they see themselves in the greater social context. And then hopefully we are able to build, again, a strong enough therapeutic alliance where I might be able to eventually question the client about how they think that symbol affects other people, and particularly me as a person of color sitting across the room from them. So I've had a lot of very interesting and nuanced discussions with people, depending on how similar or different our social and political views might be.
Okay, Leslie, that is too dramatic and delicious a story for me not to follow up on, so here goes. I'm just going to give a for instance here. I don't know if this was the case that you're referring to, but let's say somebody walks into your office with a skinhead and a Confederate flag or, on their T-shirt. How do you hold yourself back from wanting to go up to that person and smack him in the face?
Of course, let's just, under no circumstances, even outside of my therapy office, would I do anything like that. Regardless of the subject matter, it's really important for us as therapists to remain grounded and to be aware of what we are experiencing and what we are feeling in the room with clients. I think that's a huge part of doing good therapy, and also taking care of ourselves and protecting ourselves. And if anything was happening in the therapy session that was making me feel unsafe, I would find a way to extricate myself from that situation. But I would definitely be curious as to why that particular person came to meet with me. I used to work in an agency where clients were just assigned to me, and they didn't know me. They had probably never seen me before. They would just get, they would be given my name and an appointment time, and they would show up. And I am definitely aware that some people seemed taken aback to see probably a person of color. Maybe that's not what they were expecting. But in my private practice, people seek me out specifically. So if somebody sought me out in my private practice and then showed up dressed as you described, I would be very curious about why that person wanted to meet with me. And I would, again, I would ask what that symbolism means to that person. And I would also ask a lot of questions about that person's experience in the session with me. What is it like for you to sit in a room with me? How many people like me do you have contact with in your daily life? So it's just a lot of questions. And even as disagreeable as I may find the person's views, it is my job to approach that with compassion and empathy, because positive change in people does not take place when they are attacked and blamed and criticized. Positive change takes place when we are able to help people reflect on themselves and be introspective, and to understand how their views affect their behavior, and how their behavior affects their interaction with other people, and how they fit into the world.
I just want to list some of the things that Sweden did in the early phase, uniquely so. Now, the first, we talked about herd immunity, but the problem we've had is that it's not only a laissez-faire strategy, it is a we will never admit a mistake strategy. That is fundamental. And Sweden very early on, and with good cause, said this does not spread pre-symptomatically. It does not, because they compared it to SARS-1, which did not. But most countries in the world abandoned that. Sweden did not. They maintained it does not spread pre-symptomatically. And what is the result of this? The result is that there was no masks used anywhere. I'm saying anywhere. It took a whole year before doctors and nurses in hospitals started wearing masks. People became infected by their, eye doctors. This is how crazy it was. Another example of how there's no pre-symptomatic spread affected the spread was that you were not allowed to stay at home if somebody in your household was sick with COVID. If you were a kid, you had to go to school. If you were an adult, you did not get whatever you call it when you get paid for being sick or staying home. So people were encouraged to go to work and school if someone in their household had COVID. And there was no testing outside of the hospitals and care homes, which means that Sweden had the lowest degree of testing in all of Europe for the first number of months. I just want to put this in context because these are crazinesses. This is outside of the realm of most countries. So in Sweden, it took a whole year before anybody started wearing a mask. Okay, I'll answer your question about Johan Anderberg. Johan Anderberg is one of the people who has written an excellent book where he really more or less proves that Sweden had a herd immunity strategy, but he ends up by saying that Sweden did the right thing because we had basically freedom, we maintained freedom. And that is very, very important. And so I will say, yes, I agree with him to the extent that you have to judge what's more important. Is death more important? Is freedom more important? Or all other aspects, if you keep kids home from school and they suffer, is that more important to not have that than deaths, So it's always a comparison. What is important in a society? And, Sweden have had 19,000 deaths in a population of 10.3 million.
All right. Well, let me follow up with Susie on that. I guess on the one hand, measuring the number of deaths is a very sort of simple empirical way to measure how devastating a problem has been. It's a little more complicated to measure the effects of, lockdowns, restrictions, and so on and so forth. Is that part of the difficulty in figuring out who's sort of right and who's wrong on this one?
Absolutely. Deaths are very tangible. You know what a death means and what it represents. When it comes to lockdowns, they're not all the same. Lockdowns represent a number of different interventions that are applied to varying degrees in different countries. And so I think there are some pieces of it that may be easier to study and understand better. For example, the impacts on children and lost learning and social development challenges and things like that. Impacts on mental health. I don't know if we'll ever be able to capture that to the degree that we need to, but certainly it's had an impact on mental health of populations in general. Economic losses, a little bit easier to measure perhaps, but maybe not on a micro level as much, more on a macro level. But there are probably a number of other experiential things that we just don't capture. And, maybe decades from now, we'll start to get some of those anecdotes together, but they're equally important. I don't see this all as just about freedom. I think the experience is really important to capture. Does it end up balancing out in terms of death and morbidity and people having long COVID symptoms that they have to deal with the rest of their lives, et cetera? Well, I think that's a big challenge to try and weigh. I'm more leaning at the side of, the health of our population that we can measure and what we're seeing in front of us is, an impetus to actually act. And when you see hospitalizations and long-term consequences and deaths, it's really hard to ignore that. But at the same time, we can't stop thinking about some of these other consequences.
We need to teach children their letters and the sounds that those letters represent, as well as then to be able to blend those individual sounds in words in order to decode them and read them, and to hear the individual sounds in words, a part of what we call phonemic awareness, which is really critical for spelling and writing words. And so we start teaching those letter sound correspondences, and we get kids reading right away because practicing reading with their knowledge and spelling and writing with their knowledge is really important. So we teach a handful of letter sound correspondences. Kids start to decoding. We're adding to those quite quickly, the numbers that they're learning. And then they're practicing both with isolated words, and it's really important that practice also takes place in connected text, so in books. And in that way, we're enabling children to read the words on the page in books, and we're building that automatic quick word recognition, right from novice beginners all the way to expertise. And so that's phonics and phonemic awareness, and that focus on practicing word reading skills is one critical and important component of a full literacy program.
And Katie, maybe for some parents, if it's working the way it is, they might not feel like we need to change things. But do you think it would be better to serve students' needs if a phonics approach was implemented across classrooms?
Very much so, yes. Consistency is key too, right? So making sure that we're using the same language and the same strategies and using the same screening tools as we go, not just class to class or school to school, but also board to board across Ontario. Basically, that's it. I just feel that, within my early literacy groups, I have small groups that I work with. These interventions that Jamie was talking about, I see them working in real time, and it's amazing. And so I'm hoping that this report maybe allows for those interventions to be provided to all students in all classrooms across Ontario.
It must be a thrill to watch a student comprehend and get it.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's seeing the confidence that I find,
Patricia, you wanted to say
most
something?
rewarding.
I say, as someone who's actually taught to read by phonics and coding, one of the significance is the complexity of the English language. We have 26 letters of the alphabet, but almost 50 different sounds. And the English language keeps importing words from other languages, but they maintain the sounds. And so it's very important to me, as someone, as I said, who learned that way, to create that and sustain that consistency by using phonics and coding.
Oh, I totally agree, because English is my fourth language, and I learned English primarily by reading. And every day in studio, it's like that's not said properly, because the way that I learned is very different. But Jamie, Ontario is home to students who don't speak English as a first language. How is teaching phonics a part of a culturally responsive approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to borrow, I was speaking last week with a principal and a school team who are really starting to implement this approach and seeing really good results. And how he explains it is that one of the most important concepts of culturally responsive pedagogy is that we teach in a way that all students can be successful, that we have high expectations for all students. And so from research, we know if we teach in this explicit and systematic way, giving the attention that's due to the code of our language, we can help so many students be successful, including students who have different cultural backgrounds or whose home language doesn't match with the school and the language of instruction. Now, at the same time, like any teaching that teachers are doing, we welcome and respect and bring in, the cultural diversity that's represented in the classroom. And for linguistically diverse classrooms, we can really make bridges. The more we know about the student's first language and what sounds it shares with the language of instruction.
That's just some of what we covered this week. You can find the full conversations on our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.